The needle was a cold, sharp sting, a familiar violation. Elara watched the dark crimson of her life swirl into the clear tube, a liquid currency she was trading for another month's rent. The clinic was sterile, all white walls and the scent of antiseptic that failed to mask an underlying tang of something metallic and wild, like ozone before a storm. It wasn't a standard Red Cross donation center. The payout was too high, the questions too few, the location too discreet, tucked into an alley that smelled of rain-soaked concrete and forgotten things. But desperation was a powerful motivator, and hers was a howling beast in her gut. The man drawing her blood wasn't a nurse. He wore the crisp white coat of a doctor, but it fit him like a borrowed skin over a frame built for something far more brutal. Dr. Kalen Thorne, according to the bronze plaque on the door. He was a landscape of sharp angles and controlled force, from the severe line of his jaw to the way his dark hair was just a fraction too long to be considered professional. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, hadn't left her since she'd sat down. They weren't lecherous or even clinical. They were assessing. Possessive. As if he were cataloguing every beat of her pulse, every flutter of her exhausted nerves. "You're pale," he stated, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the hollow of her chest. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine." The lie was thin as gauze. She was never fine. Fine was a luxury for people who didn't have to sell pieces of themselves to survive. She was perpetually exhausted, a deep, soul-level weariness that sleep couldn't touch. The donation always made it worse, leaving her feeling hollowed out, a ghost in her own skin. He adjusted the flow, his fingers brushing the inside of her arm. A jolt, electric and shocking, shot through her. Her breath hitched. His gaze snapped to hers, and for a split second, the clinical mask slipped. A flare of something raw and predatory burned in his eyes before being ruthlessly suppressed. He said nothing, but the air thickened, charged with an unspoken question she couldn't begin to comprehend. He finished the drawer in silence, the quiet pressing in on her, amplifying the thrum of her own blood in her ears. As he taped a cotton ball to her arm, his touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the coiled tension in his shoulders. He handed her a juice box and a protein bar, standard procedure, but his movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. She felt woozy, the room tilting slightly. She pushed herself to her feet, her hand gripping the edge of the chair for support. "Thank you," she mumbled, her focus on the door, on the freedom of the city street beyond. He was standing in her way. Not physically blocking her, but his presence was a sudden wall of energy. She had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. Close up, she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the rigid control he held over himself. He smelled of pine and cold night air, a scent that was both unsettling and inexplicably comforting. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a resonant hum that slid under her skin. He spoke 2 words, strange and guttural, the syllables ancient and heavy with meaning she didn't understand. An invasor, cordonum. The words hung in the air between them, alien and yet familiar. A deep, forgotten part of her stirred, a flicker of recognition in the core of her bones. It felt like hearing her own name in a dream. Her head spun, the edges of her vision going dark. "What?" she breathed, confusion warring with a sudden, primal fear. Dr. Thorne's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "Get some rest, Miss Hale. We'll call you when we need you again." It was a dismissal, crisp and professional, but the echo of those other, older words lingered, clinging to her like a shroud, as she stumbled out of the clinic and into the grey afternoon. The dead language, whatever it was, had branded itself onto her soul, and she had the terrifying certainty that she hadn't just donated blood. She had given him a key. The walk home was a blur of disconnected sensations. The screech of bus brakes, the smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor, the press of bodies on the sidewalk, it all felt distant, filtered through a haze of profound unease. The 2 words the doctor had spoken played on a loop in her mind, a foreign melody that resonated with a frequency she'd never known she possessed. An invasa cordonum. It sounded like a prayer, or a curse. Her apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up with questionable plumbing and a view of a brick wall, but it was hers. Or hers and Maya's. Her roommate was perched on their lumpy couch, laptop balanced on her knees, a cloud of vibrant pink hair framing a face etched with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Elle," Maya said, snapping her laptop shut. "Was it that bad this time?" Elara dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter unnervingly loud in the sudden quiet. Worse, she sank onto the opposite end of the couch, the worn springs groaning in protest. "I feel scraped out." "You always do. That place is shady as hell. I still think you should just ask me for the money. And I still think you should let me have my pride," Elara retorted, though the words lacked their usual heat. She appreciated Maya's generosity, but she'd spent a lifetime being a burden. She refused to be one now. There was something different today. "The doctor," she trailed off, not sure how to explain the intensity in his gaze, the electric shock of his touch. "Hot doctor again?" Maya wiggled her eyebrows. "Tall, dark, and brooding is a good look, even if he is a professional vampire. He said something weird to me." Elara rubbed her temples, a dull ache beginning to throb behind her eyes. "In another language." It sounded old. She repeated the words, the phonetics clumsy on her tongue. "An invasa cordonum." Maya pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. Google Translate, to the rescue. A few seconds of tapping, then a frown. "Nothing. Latin, maybe?" "Nope. Gaelic." "Not a match." "It's gibberish, Elle." Maybe he just sneezed weird. But it hadn't been gibberish. Elara knew it with a certainty that defied logic. The words had weight. They had power. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so intense she gripped the arm of the couch. The room didn't just spin, it dissolved. For a terrifying second, she wasn't in her apartment. She was somewhere else. She could smell damp earth and pine needles, feel the chill of stone beneath her feet, and hear the low, rumbling growl of a massive animal nearby. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. She was back on the couch, gasping for air, the scent of Maya's lavender air freshener sharp in her nostrils. "Whoa, hey. You okay?" Maya's hand was on her shoulder, grounding her. "You completely zoned out." I don't know what that was," Elara whispered, her voice trembling. A strange sense of connection lingered, a thin, silver thread pulling her, tugging her senses toward a place she'd never been. It was pulling her back toward the clinic. Back toward him. She felt watched, not by eyes on the street, but from a distance, a focused, unwavering attention that prickled at the back of her neck. She hugged her arms around herself, a sudden chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the draft from the old window. The doctor hadn't just taken her blood. He had tethered himself to her, and that invisible leash was now beginning to tighten. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. It clung to her through her shift at the diner, a constant, unnerving pressure between her shoulder blades. Every reflection in the window seemed to hold a flicker of movement in the periphery. Every customer, who stayed too long over their coffee, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. By the time she clocked out, the moon was high and the streets were slick with a fine mist, the neon signs of the city bleeding into shimmering puddles on the asphalt. She took her usual shortcut, a narrow alleyway that cut 2 blocks off her walk home. It was usually empty, smelling of grease from the diner's dumpster and stale beer. Tonight, the air was different. It was heavy, charged with a silence that felt predatory. The usual city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic, seemed muffled, as if she'd stepped into a bubble of dead air. Halfway through, A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows near a fire escape. It wasn't a random mugger. The way it moved was wrong, too smooth, too silent. It was a silhouette, unnaturally tall and thin, and it blocked her path to the street. Her heart leaped into her throat. Every instinct, honed by a childhood spent learning to be invisible, screamed at her to run. She backed away slowly, her hand fumbling in her bag for the pepper spray Maya insisted she carry. "I don't have any money," she said, her voice a pathetic squeak. The figure didn't respond. It took a step forward, and the faint light from the street lamp at the alley's end caught the glint of eyes that were entirely black, devoid of any white or iris. A low hissing sound slithered from its direction, and the metallic, ozone scent from the clinic filled the air, stronger now, mingled with the cloying sweetness of decay. This wasn't human. Panic seized her, cold and absolute. Her fingers closed around the pepper spray, but her limbs felt like lead. The figure lunged, a blur of motion that her mind could barely process. She cried out, a strangled gasp of terror, throwing her arm up in a useless attempt to shield herself. She braced for impact, for teeth or claws or worse. It never came. A second blur, larger and darker, slammed into the creature from the side, a whirlwind of contained violence. There was a sickening crunch of bone and a guttural snarl that was pure animal fury. Elara stumbled back, hitting the brick wall hard, the rough surface scraping her skin. Standing between her and the now crumpled figure was Dr. Kalen Thorne. He was no longer wearing his white coat. Dressed in dark jeans and a black jacket, he looked less like a doctor and more like a hunter. He moved with a terrifying grace, his body a weapon poised to strike again. The creature on the ground hissed and tried to rise, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Kalen didn't hesitate. He moved in again, and with a swift, brutal efficiency that made Elara's stomach churn, the creature went still. Silence descended once more, thick and suffocating. Kalen stood over the body for a moment, his chest rising and falling heavily. Then, he turned to her. His storm-cloud eyes were blazing, the pupils dilated, and the raw, predatory something she'd seen in the clinic was now fully unleashed. He crossed the alley in 2 long strides, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries with a fierce, possessive intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, as if he wanted to touch her, but was holding himself back through sheer force of will. What was that thing?" she stammered, her gaze fixed on the motionless heap in the shadows. "A scavenger," he bit out, his jaw tight. "Drawn to the scent." "To your scent," he finally looked away from her, his attention snagged by the thing on the ground. "I shouldn't have let you leave alone. I was arrogant." The world was tilting again, the reality of what just happened crashing down on her. A monster had tried to attack her, and her bloodwork doctor had saved her by moving faster than a car. None of it made sense. "I don't understand," she whispered. His eyes met hers again, the fury softening into something more complex, something that looked dangerously like regret. "No," he said, his voice dropping. "You don't. And that's my fault. The clinic, your blood, it's not what you think. You're not what you think." He took a deep breath, the cold night air seeming to settle him. "Come with me. I can't protect you out here. I have to take you somewhere safe." He wasn't asking. It was a command wrapped in a plea, and looking at the dead thing in the alley and the impossible man standing before her, Elara knew she had no other choice. He led her not to a car, but to a heavy, black door set into the brick wall of an adjacent building she'd never noticed before. It had no handle, no lock she could see, but it swung open at his touch, revealing not a hallway, but a softly lit tunnel of polished grey stone. The air that washed over them was clean and cool, carrying the scent of earth and old magic. The door swung shut behind them, and the sounds of the city vanished completely. They were in another world. "Where are we?" Elara asked, Her voice hushed in the echoing silence. The antechamber. A way station between your world and mine, Kaelan said, his stride never faltering as he led her deeper into the earth. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space that took her breath away. It was a seamless blend of nature and architecture. A ceiling of living rock arched high above, threaded with veins of softly glowing crystal. Waterfalls cascaded down stone walls into serene pools, and walkways of dark wood connected multi-leveled structures built directly into the cavern's side. It was a hidden sanctuary, teeming with a quiet, purposeful energy. People moved through the space, their glances toward Kaelan a mixture of deference and respect. They were all like him, imbued with a coiled intensity, a grace that hinted at something not quite human. Their eyes, in varying shades of amber, grey, and green, followed her with open curiosity. Kaelan led her to a central chamber, a library of sorts, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with ancient, leather-bound books. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow on their faces. He finally stopped and faced her, his expression grim. "I am Lycan," he said, the word settling in the air with immense weight. "What you would call a werewolf is a crude, inaccurate term for what we are. This is my house. House of Thorn. And we are not the only ones." Elara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality. Werewolves. Magic tunnels. Hidden cities. It was the stuff of fantasy novels, not her bleak, hand-to-mouth existence. And the thing in the alley. A gal. A scavenger. They are drawn to potent blood sources. They are usually more discreet. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound frustration. "When I took your blood, I knew it was different. It has a resonance I've only ever read about in old texts. It carries the signature of a lost bloodline." He paused, his gaze pinning her in place. "The words I spoke to you. Anam Vasa, Cordonum. It is the old tongue, the language of our ancestors." It was an involuntary reaction. A rite of acknowledgement my instincts forced from me. The phrase is reserved for one specific lineage, a line thought to have vanished centuries ago. Her head was spinning. "What lineage? What am I?" "We don't know for certain. But your blood, it sings. It has a power that has put a target on your back. That gal was just the first. Others, far more dangerous, will come now that your scent is on the wind. When you donated your blood, you unknowingly sent up a flare in the supernatural world. And I was the one who lit the match." His self-recrimination was a palpable force, a dark cloud around him. He had brought this danger to her door, and the guilt was eating him alive. He saw her not just as a person in peril, but as his direct responsibility. A responsibility he seemed to feel down to the marrow of his bones. The library, for all its warmth, felt like the most beautiful prison she had ever seen. Kaelan had a young man with kind eyes and reddish-blonde hair named Reese show her to a suite of rooms. They were opulent, with a soft bed piled high with pillows, a private bathroom with a sunken tub, and a balcony that overlooked a subterranean garden where bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, blue-green light. It was more luxury than she had ever known, and it was utterly terrifying. A cage was still a cage, no matter how gilded the bars. Reese explained that he was Kaelan's beater, his second-in-command. He spoke of the House of Thorn with a quiet pride, explaining that they were protectors of the balance between their world and the human one. He was gentle and reassuring, but his eyes held a warrior's watchfulness. He, like everyone else here, saw her as something fragile to be guarded. A package. A prize. Later that evening, Kaelan brought her food himself. He set the tray down on a small table, the silence stretching between them. Elara hadn't touched the room, remaining perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, her jacket still on, as if she might need to flee at a moment's notice. "You should eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." A muscle feathered in his jaw. This is for your protection, Elara. The use of her first name was a shock, intimate and jarring. It feels like I'm your prisoner. You are my guest, he countered, his tone clipped. And my responsibility. A responsibility you never asked for. One I never agreed to. The doors to the suite were heavy oak, with no visible lock, but she knew she couldn't leave. 2 guards, silent and imposing, were stationed in the corridor outside. She had seen them when Rhys had left. She was trapped. Her fear began to curdle into anger, a hot, familiar defense mechanism. You brought me here, you tell me my life is in danger because of something in my blood, and you expect me to just, what? Sit here quietly until you decide what to do with me. I expect you to stay where I can keep you safe, he growled, the sound a low rumble in his chest that was more animal than human. He took a step closer, his height and sheer presence dominating the room. Do you have any idea what's hunting you? They won't just kill you. They will drain you dry, break you apart piece by piece to get what's inside you. I saw one of their kind tonight, and I will not let them touch you. The raw violence in his voice was terrifying, but beneath it, she felt that strange, inexplicable pull toward him, a sense that this man, this creature, was a shield. It was a confusing, chaotic mix of fear and a desperate, deeply buried longing for safety. Just then, the doors to her suite opened without a knock. A woman swept in, her bearing aristocratic and her beauty as sharp and cold as ice. She had hair the color of spun silver and eyes of pale, chilling blue. Her gaze swept over Elara, with thinly veiled disdain, before settling on Kaelin. Kaelin, she said, her voice like the chime of cold crystal. The council demands a word. They are displeased you brought a stray into the heart of the sanctum without consultation. Her eyes flicked back to Elara. Especially one who smells so human. Her name is Elara, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. And she's under my protection. That is all the council needs to know for now. Tell them I will attend them when I am finished. The woman, Serafina, Elara heard Rhys call her earlier, gave a stiff, offended nod. Her hostility was a palpable wave rolling off her, aimed directly at Elara. She was a rival, a clear and present threat within these supposedly safe walls. When she was gone, the tension in the room remained, thicker than before. Not everyone here is your friend, Elara stated quietly. No, Kaelin admitted, his gaze dark and troubled. Which is why you must trust me. Trust is earned, she shot back, her chin high. And all you've done so far is take my blood, abduct me, and lock me in a fancy room. She was shaking, but she wouldn't let him see it. She wouldn't be weak. Not again. Days bled into a strange, timeless rhythm in the subterranean sanctuary. Elara felt like a ghost, haunting the opulent suite Kaelin had assigned her. She ate the food that was brought, slept in the impossibly soft bed, and stared out at the glowing fungal garden, feeling the stone walls pressing in on her. The pull toward Kaelin was a constant, low-level hum beneath her skin, a magnetic north she fought with every fiber of her being. It was a terrifying vulnerability, this inexplicable connection to her captor. She finally broke. She couldn't stand the passive waiting, the feeling of being a chess piece. When Kaelin arrived with her evening meal, she was standing by the door, her arms crossed, her body radiating a defiant energy. I'm not a doll you can put in a box to keep safe, she said, her voice tight. I want to see. I want to understand what I am, what you are. If I'm going to be hunted, I deserve to know why, and I deserve to know how to fight. He studied her for a long moment, his stormy eyes searching hers. She expected him to refuse, to tell her it was too dangerous. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. If you are to be a part of this world, you will not be a helpless 1 inch. He took her to a training arena, a vast, open space where lichens sparred with a fluid, deadly grace. They moved with a speed and strength that was breathtaking, their human forms shifting in blinks to something more feral, claws elongating, eyes glowing, fangs flashing. It was brutal and beautiful. As she watched two warriors circle each other, a strange thing happened. She felt a surge of energy, a phantom echo of their movements inside her own body. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the man on the left was going to feint high and sweep the leg. He did, exactly as she'd anticipated. It happened again, and then a third time. It wasn't just prediction, it was a form of knowing, a whisper of instinct that was not her own. Kaelan, standing beside her, went rigid. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Nothing. I just knew what he was going to do." His gaze bored into her. "Concentrate. Watch Rhys and Lyra," he indicated his beater, who was now sparring with a lithe, dark-haired female. "Tell me what you see. What you feel." Elara closed her eyes for a second, focusing on the thrumming energy of the arena. When she opened them, she didn't just see the two fighters. She saw the lines of energy between them, the shifting probabilities of their next moves. She felt the subtle tremor in the ground as Rhys shifted his weight, felt the surge of adrenaline in Lyra's muscles, as she prepared to counter. "She's going to use his momentum against him," Elara whispered. "A shoulder throw." And as the words left her mouth, Lyra spun, ducking under Rhys's lunge, and sending him flying over her shoulder to land hard on the matted floor. Rhys groaned, more in surprise than pain. Kaelan's hand shot out, his fingers gripping her arm. Not painful, but with an urgency that made her heart pound. "This changes things," he breathed, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying awe. "You're not just a beacon. You're an amplifier." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a victim to be protected, but as a weapon of unimaginable power. And the look in his eyes held as much fear as it did reverence. He immediately pulled her from the arena, his grip on her arm unyielding. He didn't speak, his mind clearly racing, as he led her through winding stone corridors to a secluded section of the sanctum she hadn't seen before. The air here was different, thick with the scent of dried herbs, old parchment, and something else, a quiet, ancient wisdom. He stopped before a simple wooden door and knocked softly. "Enter, Kaelan. The threads of fate have been screaming your arrival for the last hour," a voice called from within, cracked and melodious like an old bell. The room was a circular study, its walls lined not with books, but with celestial charts, intricate tapestries depicting epic battles between wolves and monstrous creatures, and shelves cluttered with herbs, crystals, and artifacts that hummed with a quiet power. An old woman sat in a high-backed chair near a hearth, her face a beautiful road map of wrinkles, her eyes a startlingly bright, intelligent silver. "Anya," Kaelan said, his voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. He gently pushed Elara forward. "This is Elara. The one I told you of." Anya's silver eyes fixed on Elara, and it felt like being weighed and measured on a cosmic scale. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a profound, soul-deep knowing. "Ah," she breathed. "The lost song has returned to the world. Sit, child. You have questions that the past must answer." Elara sat hesitantly in the chair opposite the elder. Kaelan remained standing behind her, a silent, formidable guard. "Your blood," Anya began, her voice a soothing balm on Elara's frayed nerves, "is that of the Sanguine Veil. A human lineage, ancient and rare, blessed, or cursed, depending on the century, by the moon herself. Your ancestors were priestesses, empaths, amplifiers. They could soothe the beast within the lichen, or sharpen its claws for battle. They could see the pathways of a fight, feel the intent of an enemy. Their presence on a battlefield could turn the tide." Elara thought of the training arena, the intuitive flashes of knowing. It hadn't been a fluke. But the Veil's greatest power, and its greatest danger, Anya continued, her expression turning somber, is in the blood itself. When freely given to a lichen, it enhances their strength, speed, and healing. A true bond with a member of the Veil can make an alpha nearly invincible. But when taken by force, she paused, her gaze heavy. When ritually bled and consumed, it can grant a twisted, fleeting form of immortality. It is a power that corrupts absolutely. Centuries ago, a ruthless alpha named Valerus sought this power. He hunted your ancestors to the brink of extinction, destroying the Veil to fuel his ambition. We thought he had succeeded. We thought your line was broken forever. Valerus. The name sent a shiver of ice down Alara's spine. He's still alive. Kaelin's voice was grim. He is, Anya confirmed. Kept vital by lesser magics and a relentless will. He has spent centuries searching for a whisper of the old blood. And now, Alara, your blood is not whispering. It is screaming. The gal that attacked you was one of his scouts. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture more horrifying than she could have imagined. She wasn't just a person, she was a resource, a living chalice for a monster's ambition. The words Kaelin spoke, Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. An invasor, Cordonum. Anya's face softened. It is from the right of acknowledgement. The old tongue for soul vessel, heart's gift. It is a phrase of ultimate reverence, spoken only by an alpha who recognizes the presence of true Veil royalty. His beast knew you before his mind did. It is a sign of a profound, fated connection. Fated. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. This pull she felt, this chaotic mix of fear and attraction, wasn't just a reaction to a handsome, dangerous man. It was destiny, written in a language her blood understood better than her brain. The gilded cage suddenly felt 1,000 times smaller, the future a path she was being forced to walk. The weight of it all was crushing. Fated connections, ancient bloodlines, a centuries-old monster hunting her for her very lifeblood. Alara excused herself from Anya's chambers, the elders wise, sad eyes following her out. She didn't go back to her suite. She fled to the balcony with the glowing garden, the cool, damp air a small comfort against the fever in her mind. She was a thing. A tool. A prize. All her life, she had fought to be more than her circumstances, to be more than the scared, helpless child she had once been. And now, the universe had handed her a destiny that was all about what she was, not who she was. The trauma of her past, the feeling of being powerless at the hands of others, rose up like bile in her throat. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. A panic attack was closing in, the edges of her vision starting to swim. Alara. Kaelin's voice was soft, directly behind her. She flinched, spinning around, her back hitting the cold stone of the balustrade. Don't, she choked out, holding up a hand. Don't touch me. He stopped instantly, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. The raw power was leashed, the predatory alpha replaced by a man whose face was etched with a deep, aching concern. He saw her panic, the authentic terror in her eyes, and it seemed to crack something open in him. I won't, he promised, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. Just breathe. With me. In and out, he exaggerated his own breathing, giving her something to focus on. Slowly, painstakingly, the roaring in her ears subsided, her heartbeat stuttering back to a more normal rhythm. He didn't move closer, respecting the space she so desperately needed. I know what you are thinking, he said quietly, his gaze full of a pain that mirrored her own. That this is just another cage. That I see you as a weapon, a prize to be claimed. She couldn't speak, only nodding, tears blurring the glowing fungi below. He took a step back, deliberately increasing the distance between them. When I was younger, he began, his voice rough with memory, my father was alpha. He faced a challenge from a rogue, a brute who believed strength was the only law. My father was stronger, but the rogue fought without honor. He used my mother as a shield. My father hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was long enough. The story hung in the air, brutal and stark. I watched him die because he valued a life more than a victory. I swore I would never make that mistake. That I would be stronger, more ruthless. That I would protect my house by controlling everything, by never showing a moment's weakness. He looked at her, his storm grey eyes stripped bare, showing her the wounded young man he'd been. That's what you saw when you first met me. The alpha, the strategist. The man who saw your blood as a strategic asset, a danger to be contained. And that man was wrong. This was the first time she had seen him, truly seen him. Not the doctor, not the alpha, but Kalen. A man haunted by his own past, forged by his own trauma. A man who was just as trapped by his destiny as she was. Anya spoke of a fated connection, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. My instincts, my beast, they scream at me to claim you, to bind you to me, to lock you away where nothing can ever harm you. But the man, he shook his head, a look of self-disgust on his face. The man knows that would be the cruelest harm of all. To take your choice from you would be to become the very monster I fight against. He finally met her eyes again, and the vow in them was absolute. Valerus wants to use you. I will not. This is your life. Your power. Your choice. I will teach you to use it. I will stand with you, behind you, or in front of you, wherever you command me to stand. But I will never again stand in your way. I swear it. In that moment, the invisible tether between them changed. It was no longer a chain pulling her toward him, but a line she could choose to hold. His vulnerability was a greater show of strength than any display of feral power. And for the first time since she'd walked into that clinic, Elara didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a queen, who had just been handed back her crown. The attack came without warning. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the stone of the sanctum, a tremor that shook the very foundations. Alarms, harsh and guttural, began to sound. Shouts erupted in the corridors. They were breached. Kalen was at her side in an instant, his transformation from vulnerable man to alpha warrior absolute. Stay behind me, he ordered, but the words were different now. It was not a command to a possession, but a plea to a partner. Rhys appeared at the doorway, his face grim, a silvered blade in his hand. West Wall. Explosives. They are pouring in. It's Valerus's guard. Serafina. Kalen growled. Nowhere to be found. She showed them the weak point. It was a pressure conduit, shielded from our scryers. The betrayal was cold and sharp. Get Elara to the Elder's chamber. It's the most defensible point, Kalen commanded. He turned to Elara, his hands gripping her shoulders, his eyes blazing. Don't leave her side. No matter what. He pressed a fierce, desperate kiss to her forehead, a brand of promise and fear, and then he was gone, a dark whirlwind of fury heading toward the sounds of battle. Rhys guided her through chaos. Lycan warriors, their features already hardening into the feral lines of their fighting forms, rushed past them. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, magic, and blood. Elara's senses were on fire. She could feel the waves of rage and pain from the warriors, the cold, bloodthirsty intent of the invaders. Her gift, her curse, was a battle map unfolding in her mind. They are creating a diversion, she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. Rhys turned to her, his expression questioning. The main force is at the West Wall, yes, but it's too loud, too obvious. They are drawing your best fighters there. The real target is here. He's coming for me. As she spoke, a section of the corridor ahead of them exploded inward, showering them with stone and dust. Through the breach stepped a figure that radiated an ancient, chilling power. He was handsome in a cruel, vampiric way, with silver hair and eyes the color of dried blood. He wore black armor, and the air around him seemed to warp with malice. Valerus. Clever girl, he purred, his gaze dismissing Rhys and locking onto her. The song of your blood is even sweeter in person. Rhys shoved Alara behind him, raising his blade. You will not touch her. Valerus laughed, a sound like grinding glass. Brave, for a pup, he moved with impossible speed, a blow of black. There was a sickening clang of metal, and Rhys cried out, his sword flying from his grasp. He crumpled to the ground, clutching a deep gash in his side. Valerus stood over him, his boot on Rhys's chest. He looked at Alara, a mocking smile on his lips. See? This is what happens when you align yourself with sentimental fools. They die for you. Join me, child of the Vale. I can give you power you can't imagine. You will never be helpless again. You will be a goddess, and we will remake this world in our image. No more hiding in the dark. We will rule. He was offering her everything she had ever secretly craved: power, agency, an end to being a victim. It was a seductive poison, whispered to the most wounded parts of her soul. She looked at Rhys, bleeding on the floor. She thought of Kaelin, fighting for a home Valerus was trying to destroy. She thought of his promise. Your choice. And she chose. No, she said, her voice clear and cold. She straightened her spine, meeting the ancient monster's gaze without flinching. Valerus's smile vanished. A pity. He raised a hand, black energy crackling around his fingertips. Alara didn't run. She closed her eyes and reached, not for a weapon, but for the connection she had with Kaelin. She found the tether, that silver cord of fate, and pulled. She didn't just call to him, she poured her own energy into it, her fear, her defiance, her burgeoning, terrifying power. She opened herself to the bond, not as a recipient, but as an equal partner. Kaelin, now. The wall behind Valerus exploded. Kaelin launched himself through the opening, a primal roar tearing from his throat. He was in his half-shifted state, claws extended, fangs bared, his eyes glowing with molten silver. He was wounded, a deep cut bleeding freely from his shoulder, but he moved like a force of nature. He slammed into Valerus, and the two alphas crashed against the far wall, a whirlwind of snarls and tearing claws. Alara didn't stand by. She focused on the fight, her mind a razor's edge. She felt Valerus's intent, the way he gathered his dark energy for a strike. His left, she screamed. Kaelin responded instantly, ducking under a shadowy tendril that would have impaled him, and sinking his claws into Valerus's side. Valerus howled in rage and pain, shoving Kaelin back. He was ancient, powerful. Kaelin was younger, stronger, but wounded. It was an even match. The Heartstone. Rhys gasped from the floor, pointing a trembling finger at a glowing crystal set in the pommel of Valerus's dagger at his belt. It's what keeps him anchored. Valerus laughed, turning his attention to Alara again. You see too much, he lunged for her. But Kaelin was there, intercepting him. As they grappled, their strength pitted against each other. Alara saw her opening. She wasn't a warrior. She was an amplifier. She focused all her will, all her energy, not on Valerus, but on Kaelin. She pushed her strength, her certainty, her belief down the bond between them, a torrent of pure power. Take it! Kaelin roared as her energy flooded him. His wounds steamed, his muscles bulged, his eyes blazed with white-hot light. He felt her inside his mind, a guiding presence, a second set of eyes. He broke Valerus's grip, his claws flashing out, not at Valerus's body, but at his belt. The claws connected with the Heartstone. It shattered with a sound like a dying scream. A wave of foul energy erupted from Valerus. His form flickered, the handsome visage melting away to reveal something ancient and withered beneath. He shrieked, clutching his chest as centuries of stolen life abandoned him. With a final, desperate snarl, he dissolved into a cloud of black dust and malevolent whispers. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. The alarms in the sanctum died down. The battle was over. Kalen staggered, the borrowed power receding, leaving him wounded and exhausted. He leaned against the wall, his gaze finding Alara's across the rubble-strewn corridor. The raw need, the reverence, the sheer, unadulterated love in his eyes was a physical blow. She walked toward him, her steps steady. She was no longer the frightened girl from the clinic. She was no longer a victim or a prize. She was Alara of the Sanguine Vale, a woman who had faced a monster and chosen her own side. She stopped in front of him, reaching up to gently touch the cut on his shoulder. He flinched, but not from pain. Her touch was a spark, a current that flowed between them, clean and pure. He looked down at her, the powerful alpha of House Thorn, waiting. Waiting for her. "You said it was my choice," she said softly, her voice resonating with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Always," he breathed, his voice raw. She leaned in, rising on her toes, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a kiss of gratitude or surrender. It was a kiss of partnership. Acclaiming, mutual and absolute. It was the sealing of a vow made in the heart of a battle, a promise of a future they would build together. Amidst the dust and ruin of their home, they had found their foundation.